At least 30 veterans at the LaSalle Veterans Home have died due to COVID-19, and nearly 9 in 10 of the residents and staff there have been infected. We've already detailed how the breakdown of those protocols occurred, but Congressman Adam Kinzinger has leveled a weightier charge that actually the state of Illinois rejected federal help from infectious disease experts weeks ago and could have done more to stop the spread. He joins us now, Congressman Kinzinger from Capitol Hill. Thank you for joining us. Can you elaborate? You said the state of Illinois kept saying no, apparently over and over again, if I understand your words correctly. What's the evidence and the timeline there? How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of conflicting timelines, even from the governor's office. Here's what we know. At the first day of November, we had our first case. We know that just a few days later, they did a routine surveillance, found that a lot of the staff was infected. We know that the first person from the Illinois Department of Public Health did not show up until November 12th. So that's significantly after that. And we know that on November 19th, my staff and Senator Sue Rezin had a call with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which said that they have an offer on the table for help to help the state of Illinois, but that they haven't heard yet. Now, the governor's timeline says that they'd first heard the offer of help from the 19th. So I don't know what we've been basically asking for days is different than the governor saying that's the first time that showed up. But there's a couple of concerning things. Number one, why did it take a week and a half for the first person in the state of Illinois to come visit the home? At that point, you had a rapid acceleration. And then secondly, once that offer, even if the offer was put down on the 19th, it's still 5 days till the expert shows up. We know that our own local infectious disease person there had COVID themselves, so there was nobody on the ground there. And look, we just need answers to that. The bottom line, if there's an intergovernmental process that took 2 weeks and takes too long, we need to know that. But it seems like there's a lot of conflicting.
The timeline the governor's office provided us said that the USVA asked if they needed help on the 5th with PPE. The state at that time accepted it and said yes, they got those N95 masks immediately thereafter. The state also says that USVA asked the state if they wanted extra consultation on the 9th, and they responded yes. But so as early as the 9th, that request was out there, according to the governor's office. And then the first person showing up, I believe on the 27th. Does that show you there's some trouble in? State and federal agencies don't often work together, I suppose, this closely on the ground with staff on scene, but you'd like to have seen a faster response?
I know that on the 19th, we were briefed that they had an offer to send somebody on the table, and they've been calling the state daily and have not heard anything until that point. It was accepted a little later, and then the person showed up even later than that. In terms of accepting PPE, that's great. That's very different than the timeline we're talking about. We're talking about bringing in an infectious disease expert when your own current expert is out with COVID, so they can't be on the ground. We know that the inspection of the home found a lot of things that were wrong, including hand sanitizer that didn't kill COVID. And we know that from basically the first kind of massive outbreak until the first time anybody from the state of Illinois showed up was 11 days. And so I'm not saying this to level, massive accusations, except to say that those are the kind of things we need answers on. I mean, the governor, I know, made a big deal in his campaign about what happened with the Legionnaires outbreak in Quincy. I just think we need answers to this. If it's not the governor's fault, that's fine, but we need to find out where that is. An IG report, which the governor's commissioned, Inspector General, that's great in the long term, but that takes 4 to 6 months. We have a real issue now. And if it's an issue on the federal side, that's something we need to know as well.
Why weren't you as vocal regarding Quincy? Of course, that happened in 2016. The governor's campaign made noise about it a year and a half to 2 years later. But how did you evaluate what happened in Quincy, and how do you compare it to what's happening now?
Well, I think the response in Quincy took 3 days, and Quincy's not in my district. This veterans home is. And this is something in the middle of a massive pandemic where we've had, quite honestly, about 9 months or so to prepare for something like this. It makes waiting 4 times longer than what happened in Quincy with, the Legionnaires outbreak even more interesting. So, look, should I have been louder about the Legionnaires in Quincy? Maybe. I think I spoke out on it. But this is a situation in my district in the middle of 9 months later of a pandemic. We fully could have expected something like this to happen, and the state should have been prepared. And by the way, the federal government cannot come in on a state veterans home unless invited.
Mm-hmm. The federal government, pardon me, the federal government does provide funding, though, to these state-run homes through the Veterans Affairs funding mechanisms and through a number of ways. In fact, Congress had queued up a bill in the HEROES Act that would have provided $100 million for the care of elderly veterans, specifically the ones residing in state homes, like the one in your district. You voted against that. Why?
Well, but first off, let's be clear. The CARES Act that did pass that I voted for had $150 million for this in there. And what you may be talking about is something additional that was a partisan bill put out by Speaker Pelosi. That was about $4 trillion, half of which had nothing to do with COVID in the first place, and also further defunded the police. So that's a very different thing than what we're talking about now. The funding is there. The funding can be provided. The question isn't, was there not enough money to handle it? The question is, for about the entire month of November, there was an outbreak at the home in which ducks were slowly being put into a row. And we just want to know why. We just want to know where that hit, what was the issue, who was responsible. And I think that's an answer that I don't necessarily deserve, but every resident of the 16th district, state of Illinois, the country, and family members of those that have died at that home deserve.
Mm-hmm. Do you know enough today to say that that delay itself might have been deadly?
No, and I'm not going to lay that accusation out. I think that's bombastic. I think the thing we need to do, though, is get to the answer of this. Why is it that it took 11 days once the first report happened for the state to show up? And why did it take so much longer for the federal government to get the official invite to come in? I don't know the answers to that. And I think that's the basic thing we want to know. Did it cost lives? I think leveling an accusation like that at this point, nobody intentionally did anything like this, I think is very important to say.
Well, and I do want to be clear, we have outstanding requests right now trying to get to the bottom of this, because when you said that people had denied federal help, we wanted to find that evidence. We wanted to look for it. We have yet to see that evidence. So I just want to ask again, do you have, because you're saying right now you don't know what happened in that delay or in that window, but you also said that the state over and over again said, no, we don't want help. I guess I don't see the evidence for that yet, that someone actually said, no, outright, we don't want it. The state, the governor's office is saying they accepted the help at every turn.
Yeah, they're saying they accepted help. It had nothing to do with what we're talking about. What we know is that on the 19th, we had a call with the federal government that said an offer is on the table. They're calling the state daily, and they have yet to receive basically permission to come in with their experts. If that's not evidence, I don't know what is. If you need an email, if you need a text message, I'm not sure if they emailed or text, but they said that they've been calling at the 19th. So that to me is clear evidence that we at least need answers on that, and we should go from there.
Certainly, it's tragic what happened there. You've also been critical recently of Republicans, including President Trump, who have made baseless accusations about the election and the results there. There's another Republican in Illinois, Darren Bailey, now a state senator-elect, a representative who had some words for you.
We've got many Illinois Republican leaders throughout the state calling for Donald Trump to step down, calling for him to give up. That's appalling. Adam Kinzinger, a U.S. congressman from the northern part of the state, seems to be leading this charge. He's been calling for quite some time for Donald Trump to just give up, concede, and get out of the way. Get on his Twitter and Facebook's accounts and tell him to get his priorities straight if he's a Republican, otherwise change his party.
I wonder if you can respond to Senator-elect Bailey.
Well, I mean, it sounds like he's just trying to get some attention or trying to set himself up for whatever that is. That's fine. I understand that he wants to be known, but the bottom line is this. What I analyze everything I do through is, I think you can have spirited battles in politics. I think you have to have spirited battles in politics. But the thing that this country has always held dear is that we have peaceful transitions of power, that we accept election results. If you have evidence of fraud, that's very important to bring out. But if you don't, accusations alone don't count. And that misinformation itself can be devastating to a country that governs itself. And I'm going to continue to be clear on that, as I have for 10 years in politics, quite honestly. My accountability is to my district, to God, and that's it, not to Mr. Bailey or anybody else. And the bottom line is, I want this country to succeed. And the ability to have a peaceful transition of power is key to that.
The transition of power is one part of that. The other part that he seems to insinuate or heavily imply is that to be a Republican is to be inherently loyal to Donald Trump, the brand, the party itself being a one-man party. How does the Republican Party move on from here under a Biden administration, and how do you resolve those internal party conflicts?
So there'll always be internal party conflicts. You have two parties that represent, for all intents and purposes, almost 400 million people. You're always going to have differences. I'm just going to continue to try to be more optimistic, and I think showing people a vision of what the future looks like, what conservatism really is. And I'd put my conservative credentials up against anybody any day. But the party, frankly, when you swear into the Constitution of the United States, I've done it both as a member of Congress and I still do it as a military officer. That is what I swear an allegiance to, not to any party and not to any man. And the bottom line is, while President Trump may have done some good things, he lost an election, and we move on from that, and the party will survive longer than I'm even on in this earth.
Can you beat J.B. Pritzker in a race for governor?
I don't know. I haven't thought much about it, honestly. I know there's chatter out there. It's not my intention to run statewide. I think, some of the things I've been saying that have led to this kind of fire, you just have to look at the last 4 years and see that I've been outspoken from the beginning, and will continue to be. I don't know what the future holds. I don't rule anything out, but I'm certainly not sitting around giddy planning for something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, reading your criticism of the governor recently in this outbreak, of course, the outbreak just happened, so it's timely. But 3 weeks ago, you also, before this outbreak was largely known, you said if the stars align, you'd look at it, you'd think about it. So here we are today. Maybe candidates don't declare until March or April. How do those stars look to you now, and what would it take for you to throw your hat in the ring for a race like that?
What it takes is looking at something, knowing you can make a difference. You're the right person to do it, and you have the heart to do it and the energy.
And the funding to beat a billionaire.
And the funding to beat a billionaire as well. And but the bottom line is, look, I honestly am not sitting around searching for this. I'm not planning for it. This is more other people bringing this up in the media and talking about it and speculating than anything I've ever done. The fact that I can criticize both President Trump and the governor when something like this happens in my district is not an indication of anything, except I'm trying to do my best to represent, the 700-some thousand people I do.
Why don't more of your Republican colleagues accept or vocally criticize President Trump for delaying his concession or denying that he lost? Should your colleagues, specifically the 4 Republican members of Congress, should they also say what you've said publicly, that President Trump lost, that President-elect Biden is going to take office next month?
Yeah, I can't speak for them. Everybody has to make their own decision on it. I know this much. I think where there are accusations of voter fraud that are legit, and I think there is some legitimate voter fraud accusations, probably there is almost every election. It's not enough to overturn an election. And it's very different to say investigate voter fraud, as we always should, to then say that invalidates a legitimate election. And so why don't more people speak out? Generally, I can't speak for the other members of Illinois. I think people look at Twitter too much. They believe Twitter is reality. And but the bottom line is everybody's got to make that decision. And I'm very convinced that in January 20th, or 21st, we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power like we've done for a couple hundred years.
I appreciate your time. I have to ask you one more question before I let you go. You mentioned Twitter there. President Trump has threatened to veto the defense bill if there's not a Section 230 revision. He wants to get at some of the liability protections for social media companies and big tech companies. I understand you disagree with the president there. You don't think he should hold up defense funds for a separate, unrelated fight. But how do you get at that issue? How do you've said here, you've criticized fake news or misinformation spreading. How culpable are big tech companies for that? How responsible are they for fixing it? And what is the government's role in addressing that issue?
Yeah, that's something I've been racking my brain trying to think about, because I think it's deeper than just throwing out Section 230 or doing something like that. We have to walk a fine line in this country between freedom of speech, but also not being able to yell fire in a crowded theater, which is not protected speech. And we're getting to the point where some of the stuff you see, the conspiracy theories on Twitter that have a real impact, are actually devastating to society and damaging to society. I don't have the answer to that yet. And I think that's something it's probably going to take a while for government to kind of figure out where you fit in on that. But repealing Section 230 is quick And I think there's impacts that we don't necessarily understand would happen. And secondly, it's not the place to do it. It's not even germane to do it on the National Defense Authorization Act, which we've been working on out here for 6 months, and we finally have gotten it done. And I hope we can override if the president does choose to veto this.
All right, Congressman Adam Kinzinger joining us from Capitol Hill, your first time on Capitol Connection. We do hope to have you back. Thank you for your time.
You bet. Take care.
We're back in just a moment.